It's time for the movie raid, movie review, and tonight I'm going to talk about Waterworld, starring Kevin Costner. Now, this is a post-apocalyptic type of film, and the story involves that the polar ice caps has melted, and civilization has been basically engulfed by water. You know, cities have been completely flooded out, and everything else, so it's basically just water. And so what's left of the remnants of humanity, they survive. Still at this point, you know, X amount of years, people still continue to survive, even though everything is completely engulfed in water. So Kevin Costner's character, the Mariner, you know, he's just minding his own business basically, and eventually, gets encountered by a thief, and the thief doesn't really get away with it, and so the Mariner, you know, he gets a tip by that thief that there's a town, or a makeshift town, and you know, he visits it, does a little trading, and then, you know, again, he gets attacked by, you know, other people, and that tries to basically get him killed. But they also found out that the Mariner is not a human per se. He actually has gills, and they call him a mutation, and then they basically try him for death because he's a different type of breed, so to speak. And so we see that there's more to it, though. Not only is that he's a mutant, but there's also a little girl involved who has this tattoo on her back. And the tattoo is supposed to symbolize that it is a map that goes to dry land. So this whole story is about these smokers who are these bad guys, a bunch of, you know, renegades and not so nice people, which also stars Dennis Hopper, who is the leader of the smokers. And so the whole point of this, the smokers want this girl who has a tattoo on her back, and they want the map to dry land, but they don't know where it is because it's written in Chinese or Japanese, whichever it's originally written in. And so that the whole point is, you know, Kevin Costner's character meets up with these two main characters, the little girl, and then we got the woman that is not exactly the mother of the girl, but treated as a mother to the girl. So that's the whole point of the story. So story-wise, in my opinion, I felt that it just needed more to it. Granted, this whole film is all action. Now, if you have not seen Waterworld, and this will be your first time, you're going to see that it is pure action pretty much the entire duration of this film. There's no real drama. You can see where the money went to. You got explosions, you got gunplay, you've got, you know, saving the girl, saving this girl, saving that person, whatever. You got a whole lot of this and that going on. And I felt that, character-wise, there's not a whole lot of characterization at all, really. Even with Kevin Costner's character, it's pretty simple. Kevin Costner's character is pretty antisocial, anti-hero. I don't consider him as a hero in this film at all. Almost think of it like a Snake Plissken character, minus the, no guns or anything like that, because with these characters, they're just barely, noticeable if you look into the story itself. Even Kevin Costner's character has no real depth to it. Even his interaction with other characters, they don't have a whole lot of anything to them either. It's just a kind of point A, point B. They want to go to dry land. He doesn't care enough to go to dry land because he is accustomed to the water. And I felt that there's just not a lot to go with these characters. There's not to the point where you could sympathize with them. There's not any kind of emotion that you could feel toward any of these characters. I will say the cast is good. But I also want to point out that with these characters, like X amount of years has gone by since the world has been engulfed in water, and the civilization, apparently they have their own language, their own culture. And I kind of wish that they touch a little bit more on their culture. We see at the beginning of the story, you know, they speak a different language, and they speak English as well. And it kind of just, you know, gets easily ignored and kind of just, you know, forgettable, really, because they have a certain way of living. And we can see they have a lot of makeshift stuff from the world. You know, they're wearing all kinds of clothing that people wore, like, you know, fisherman gear or whatever. But in this case, it's like Mad Max, basically. If you see that what they wear whatever, you know, they make. So in this case, the characters are wearing all kinds of different you know, makeshift clothing and accessories and whatnot. And I like that. I will say that was a pretty cool look of these characters that's in this film. They all have interesting looks, and as far as culture goes, it's so easily ignored, you know. But I get it that when you move along with the story with this, sure. But for the most part, character-wise, characterization-wise, there's not a whole lot to really look into. And I would like to also point out that the smokers, now I'm going to talk about the smokers. The smokers are like a big gang, you know, and they own this giant ship, this giant carrier. Well, not exactly a carrier ship, but let's just say it's a massive, you know, kind of containment type of ship, and it's a rust bucket, basically. But I like the fact that we don't know, like, when the smokers, you know, acquired this ship, but we do know that they've been on this ship for a very, very long time. And everything on there is very old, and, you know, all they do is live off of cigarettes and booze, basically, and spam. And that's all you really see throughout this whole film. And I would have liked to have seen more, or at least a couple more civilization type towns, or little makeshift areas, you know, that people inhabited. But we only hear of the places that these other characters have been. Like at the beginning of the film, that the character says, yeah, you know, as far as him, you know, the main character asks, you know, where'd you get that boat? And he says, oh, I took it legally. You know, it's like, but we don't hear a whole lot of anything else. We just see that one main town where it gets, you know, attacked by the smokers, and then that's pretty much it, you know. And the rest of it is just a whole lot of boating. But I will also say that, you know, the main character, Kevin Costner's character, has a really interesting boat. You know, I never seen a boat like this before. I'm not a boat expert, let alone a fisherman in general, of knowledge of that. And to me, when I see something like that, I think that's pretty cool. That it's almost like, you know, one of those vehicles that you see in films, like for example, Knight Rider, or, you know, the Ghostbuster car, or the Batmobile. You see these really cool, unique cars, and to me, in this film, it's a known boat in the boating world, but to me, it's got all these interesting features, and it's kind of, you know, to me, it's like a Batmobile version, but, you know, he uses it against enemies too, which I thought that was also unique. I mean, because he pulls out, you know, a certain lever or right there, and this whole big sail comes out, or this, you know, weapon comes out, or whatever, and he makes use of it. Now, there's also another thing I want to point out. Lack of enemies in this, not just the smokers, but we also see something else where the money went to. I can imagine that probably cost at least $10,000, $12,000 just to do the big mammoth fish, or what looks like to be a mutated looking version of a whale, or some sort of like that, where the mariner dives into the water. He has to get food for his passengers that saved him, from the battle with the smokers on the little makeshift town. So he dives in, and we see that, he survives, but like this massive, monster comes out and, tries to eat him, and he blows him up and stuff. And I thought that was pretty cool. But that's the only time you're gonna see in this movie any kind of monsters. But I thought that was really cool. But I can see at that time probably was really expensive just to do that. I mean, once again, the action in this film you can tell it's very expensive because all the explosions, all the stunts, all the shooting, there's a lot of it going on in this movie. For something that is just based on water as far as action goes, I will say that it's an interesting look to that. It's an interesting, film. And I would imagine that it was probably the hardest to do, even though you've got just basically three main characters in this film the whole time, and you got Dennis Hopper's character, who, again, the leader of the smokers and his little band of renegades, but we see very less of that too. But I would have liked to have seen more interaction from other characters, not just with the Mariner, but I will just a little bit more here and there. But for the most part, you just simply see the Mariner and the two main passengers that he has. They just sail, and then point A, point B. Now I'll also talk about the soundtrack, the score. I really enjoy the score. The score really sets the tone of each scene. Really puts you, in that kind of trance when you listen to it. And you got the downtime between, from the fight and all that stuff, and just talking and whatnot from the characters, and you can feel the emotion. Well, I'll point out a scene, for example, where the Mariner is teaching the girl how to swim. I absolutely love that theme to that. And he goes that slow motion where he's teaching her how to swim. And I think it's just a beautiful work of the score itself. But if I were to give this film out of a 10, I would definitely give it a 7.7, because it has plenty of action, and you got Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner is, I'm amazed of the physicality that he had to endure during this film. There's a lot of jumping, a lot of running, a lot of physical, activity between characters and enemies and so forth. And I'm just blown away that he was able to do that in that kind of condition for something, a film like this kind of setting. But basically, it's got all the action you want into it, but don't expect a whole lot of drama, a whole lot of character depth between all the other characters, because you just don't see much of anything. But like I said, I would have liked to have seen more of the aesthetics of culture that they have basically adapted as far as the civilization, more characters involved. But I would understand if the budget was not really called for that, because of it was used mainly on the action base. I mean, it is an action based movie, but you don't want to cut out some of the more important things, like what's the point of the Mariner? What's his actual goal? Is he just there to cruise around, just enjoy the world itself, and it kind of questions it, like, where are these characters really going? But for the most part, if you really look into the story itself, like, what happened to these the rest of the civilization? Are there other civilizations out there? And how do they survive this long, X amount of years? Because there's no cities, no anything except for that main goal about the dry land, which is the main goal of this whole film. And I would have liked to see more interaction, even at the end of the film, where the Mariner is trying to save the girl, and again, it's more of a point A, point B, and that's it. It's not a bad movie. I really do enjoy this movie, and I felt that Dennis Hopper does a great job. I mean, first of all, Dennis Hopper to me is an excellent actor. He does such a good job in this movie. He's as a bad guy, man, he does really well at this. And again, there's even unique characters of the smokers themselves, but we kind of just briefly see them and quickly talk about the I guess the supporting villain to Dennis Hopper's character, the man that basically got the Mariner in trouble to begin with at the beginning of the film, the smoker spy, so to speak, I guess. And I thought that he did a really well job pertaining to that, because you can definitely feel that vibe that he's he's scum. You can feel that. But I definitely give this a 7.7 because of the action and because of the environment, which is I think it's unique, because how often do you really see post-apocalyptic type films that involve just water? Now, it may sound boring, but I mean, it can be adventurous, but lack of character depth, in my opinion. But it's a good movie, in my opinion. I really do enjoy it, but don't expect something major as far as dialogue goes. Even the dialogue is pretty thin, but it's a good movie, and I definitely would recommend checking it out.